Chapter 4. Nico led them along the spiral road that gave Winding Circle its name, walking its broad loops instead of cutting across them on the many straight paths available. Sandry talked to him, walking backward part of the time so she could watch his face. "How long have you been here? I wish you told me you were back. It's nice to see you." Nico smiled. "I'm happy to see you too. You look well." Sandry grinned and nearly tripped on the raised border of the road. Triss caught her, letting go as soon as she regained her balance. "Thank you," Sandry told her cheerfully. "Sometimes I get so busy talking I forget." "Are you all right?" Triss had stopped in the middle of the road. Red-faced a moment ago, she was now gray-white. "Steady her," Nico said quietly, grabbing one of Triss's arms. Sandry obeyed. Beneath them, like a giant turning in his sleep, the earth rolled and went calm. All three of them staggered. Nico frowned. "Another tremor. That's how many since the spring equinox? 5? 6, growled Triss. Her face went crimson when he looked at her. She yanked away from him and Sandry. "Do you want to tell me about it?" he asked. "I don't recall you having spells like this on our way here." "No, I don't want to talk about it," snapped Triss. "I don't talk to anyone about anything anymore." She wiped her sweaty face on her sleeve of her ugly wool gown. Sandry noticed that Nico, about to say more to Triss, looked at her and seemed to change his mind. "I hope these tremors aren't a sign of a big quake to come," he said calmly, and urged them forward. The girls shivered and drew the god circle on their chests for protection. Leaving the road before they reached the temple's north entrance, Nico opened a small gate and led them down a path to a stone cottage. Framed by gardens, the house was neat and clean. The roof well thatched, the shutters and door painted bright green. On either side of the main building, the whitewashed stones supported additions. One was built of solid wood pierced by windows. The other was a wooden frame with sheer cloth screening its open sides. "Wonderful!" Sandry peered at the addition, curious. The cloth was thin enough for light to enter, but no insects. "I wonder how it's woven." "You may examine it later," Nico said. "Go in. This is Discipline, your new home." When they entered, a boy with coarse-cut black hair was sniffing dried herbs that hung in bunches near the hearth. Seeing the girls, he skipped back as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. "Good morning, Briar," Nico said. "I've brought you some housemates." The boy glared at them, his eyes a startling gray-green in his golden-brown face. "Oh, wonderful," he replied. "More girls." "It could be worse." The quiet, lilting voice came from a room to Triss's left. "It could be more boys." A tall black girl, dressed in a scarlet coat and leggings, emerged carrying a wooden crate filled with possessions. Her face was round and calm, framed by a head full of short braids. She nodded to Nico, who smiled. "Dasha!" Sandry grinned at her. It was good to see a familiar face. "You live here?" "Since yesterday," the other girl replied. "We're being punished, all right," Triss muttered. How could she live with a traitor? "You have a problem with me, Kak?" Daja inquired, black eyes flashing. "Daja!" cried Sandry, shocked. Kak might be the word that traders use to mean non-traders, but it was also a very rude word. A tall woman in the dark green habit of an earth dedicate came in through a side door. Like Briar's, her skin was golden brown. She wore her curly black hair cut short, and her smile was genuinely welcoming. "Nico, more desperate criminals for us? They must be cleaning a house down at the hub." "Dedicate Lark," said Nico. "I'd like you to meet Sandry and Triss." To the newcomers he added, "Lark and Dedicate Rosethorn are in charge of discipline." "Welcome, both of you," Lark said, resting a strong hand on each girl's shoulder. "May you weave happy lives here." Sandry dipped a curtsy. Triss attempted to do the same, but wobbled and nearly fell over. The boy snorted and Triss blushed. "This is Briar." Lark pointed to the boy, who scuffed a bare foot across the wood floor. He was taller than the new girls, dressed in sturdy breeches of plain brown cloth and a white shirt. Where his sleeves should have been, there was only ragged holes. He'd cut them off. Lark pointed to the traitor. "And Daja." "We've met," Daja and Sandry chorused and grinned at each other. "Here's my room," Briar announced flatly, going to an open door at Sandry's right. "I came here first and I'm keeping it. You kids stay out." He disappeared inside. "Kids?" Sandry asked, puzzled. "Why is he talking about goats?" "Kid is thieves' cant for child," Lark said. "Now, there's another room on this floor." She glanced at the black girl. "Daja says she prefers one of the upstairs rooms. We have another spare room up there as well." "Our own rooms?" Triss asked, startled into speech. I thought this was a punishment place. It's for people who are ill at ease with the other winding circle children, Lark replied. Things go better here if our guests have rooms of their own. Tris glared at the boy's closed door. May I see the room upstairs? She asked, thinking. I want to be as far from him as possible. Come on, Dasha said. I'll show you. Merchant girl. Going to the back of the long main room, she climbed a steep and narrow stair. Tris followed her. Lark started to set the table near the kitchen hearth, drifting toward the free downstairs room. Sandry kept an eye on Briar and Nico. The boy grabbed Nico, drawing him closer. Sandry entered the empty room and ducked behind the open door out of sight. She could hear Briar's hoarse whisper. It wasn't me nicked them things, Nico. If they told you, I did. I know you didn't, replied the man just as quietly. But knives, Briar? I need knives? You don't know what it's knives. Briar gave up. I want them, Nico said flatly. The boy stuttered, outraged. All of them, insisted the man. But it ain't safe, protested Briar. What if I have to defend myself? The knives, Briar. If you have them, you also have the temptation to use them. Now, if you please. Slouching, Briar left Nico, and Sandry tugged a braid, thinking about what she'd just heard. At last, she shrugged. She didn't think Nico would put her any place where she would be in danger. That decided, she looked around at her new home. The room was plain and clean, its walls covered with a coat of whitewash. The bed, night table, stool, and wardrobe were all roughly made but sturdy. The desk was slightly better, as was the chair in front of it. The front window gave her a view of the path to the door and the spiral road beyond. Going to the window in her side wall, she looked out. This view was of the inside of the wooden frame addition, the one with cloth screens. Long poles braced shutters against the ceiling to open the sides of the place. A workroom. It contained a pair of long tables, a big spinning wheel and a smaller one, and a pair of hanging looms. Baskets on the floor held bundles of dyed and undyed wool, as well as spools and balls of spun wool, flax, cotton, and silk. Near the back wall stood a larger loom. On its web hung a shimmering cloth, its design not quite visible to her straining eyes. Lark weaves, she thought, excited. She could teach me to... Her spirits fell. She was Sandrine Fa-Torin, an heiress who was kin to royalty in 2 countries. No one had ever let her weave, or even handle wool, cotton, or flax. Silks she might touch, but even Parisi had said that she'd spent more time at needlework than was proper. Ladies were supposed to like embroidery only for a few hours, not all the time. Dedicate Quayle at Pearl Cup Dormitory had lectured her on the condition of her fingers from near constant needlework and sentenced her to 3 nights of sleeping with hands wrapped in salve and cotton. Maybe Lark will be different, she thought, with very little hope. Maybe. Tris stuck her head through the long window of the empty room upstairs. Below, past the solid wood shed at the side of the first story, was a garden that cupped the back and sides of the house. A figure in a green habit knelt between rows of plants. The girl made a face. She hoped that no one was going to expect her to garden. Ugh, she hated dirt. Beyond the garden lay grapevines, which meant bees, another thing to avoid. Beyond that, her eyes met the wall that encircled the temple community. Built solidly of gray stone, it rose 20 feet into the air. There were stairs that led to the top, narrow ones, spaced every 200 yards on the wall. Every 400 yards, a small and solid tower rose above the upper walkway. Tris blinked. Someone who climbed to the top of the wall would be inside any storm that passed. The winds would strike purely, coming in from sea or fields, with no streets and buildings to catch them and draw out their strength. A city girl, she'd always known that the air she felt, even on rooftops, had its teeth drawn as it passed over encircling walls to pick up all the smells of busy humans, not land, sea, or rock. Looking down, she smiled. The roof of the shed under her window was easy to reach. The ground wouldn't be too far below that. You want it? Asked the trader from the door. The other's fine for me if you like this one. I don't mind. Realizing that she was half out of the window, Tris pulled herself in. This seems nice. She flopped onto the bed and lay back to stare at the ceiling. This is their punishment place, she thought, forgetting Daja was still there. If I'm kicked out, I have nowhere else to go. No one in Caption wants me. I'd best try to stay out of trouble then, if I can. If something doesn't happen, except something always does. And what's Nico doing here again, she wondered. I thought he was supposed to be running special errands this spring, unless he finished them all. She sighed, her brain still buzzing without let-up. Dahlia saw that the redhead was lost in daydreams. Cox, she thought, returning to her new room. They only look at you when they want something. She ran an affectionate hand over the box, her suraku, at the foot of her cot. With the Kusubo mark stamped deep into the leather on all sides, no matter where she put it, she knew she was home. It had served her all the way to Winding Circle. Gently, Dahlia rubbed the Kusubo imprint with a finger. If I fail here, where can I go, she thought, not knowing that Trist asked the same thing. I am Trangshi, without family, without a place. I must not fail, she told herself, taking a deep breath. Maybe it won't be so bad. I like Sandry well enough, and she speaks trader talk. Hello. Sandry was in her doorway as if Dahlia's thoughts had called her. Is this your new room? What a silly question. Dahlia went to the crate she'd carried upstairs and got out the incense pot, candlesticks, and god images. Taking them to a small table in the corner, she began to arrange them. I am silly now and then, Sandry admitted. My mother said I was anyway. If you know, you can stop it. Carefully, Dahlia placed a candle behind Trader Coma's image. Then you've never been silly, or you'd know it just creeps up without any warning. Startled, Dahlia looked at the other girl and saw that her blue eyes were dancing. Oh, you, she said, flapping a hand. Come in, then. Sit down. Thank you. Sandry went to the open window and sat on the ledge. Is this house a nice place? I've only been here for a day, but, well, Lark is kind. Dahlia lit a stick of incense in front of the wooden plaque engraved with their family's name. You'll like her. Rose Thorn, the other dedicate. She is like, well, they're called porcupines. I've seen them. They're like pigs or woodchucks with backs full of long pins. You saw them in the menagerie? No, in Bahan, 3 years ago in the forest. My parents... She stopped, then went on determinedly, cheerful. They loved to travel. So, how did you come here if you were in Bahan? Oh, my great-uncle lives in Summersea. She looked out the window. My parents died last fall when there was smallpox in Hatar, and he was the closest relative. The rest of my family's in Namorn. As if she heard it afresh, Dahlia remembered what Sandry had told those girls just 2 weeks ago. The great niece of His Grace, Duke Vedris of this realm of Amalon, and cousin of Her Imperial Highness, Empress Berenini of the Namorn Empire. If Sandry now spoke of her relatives as if they were just normal people, she must not want it generally known that she was almost royalty. So, that's why you wear all that black, Dahlia remarked. Somebody told me once that landsmen wear black for mourning. So are you, I see. Sandry's wave took in the other girl's clothes. Dahlia smoothed her crimson tunic. Traders mourn in red. Traders mourn in red? Asked a scornful voice. Briar stood in the doorway, leaning against the jamb. What kind of barbarian thing is that? Red is for blood, explained Dahlia. She wasn't offended by his tone. Cocks were ignorant. She couldn't expect one to be as courteous as real people. She started to say, and changed her term when she caught Sandry's glare. Even a mud roller like you should know that much. In trader talk, she told the other girl, and he is a cock. I haven't spent my life with my fingers in my ears, Briar remarked in clumsy but plain trader talk, and I'm not stupid. Switching back to common, he added, beats me how you people don't break teeth on that gabble. Dahlia showed him all of hers in a big warning grin. Our teeth are stronger than yours is why. Sandry interrupted them before they could answer. If you're going to share the same house, shouldn't we try to get along? Don't bother with him, Dahlia advised. He's just rude and ignorant. Not as ignorant as you thought a moment ago, he teased. Behind him, Trist announced, I'm starved. When do we eat? Midday's on the table, called Lark from below. Trist bolted for the stair. Briar raced to catch up, but she beat him to it. We better watch him, Dahlia told Sandry, closing the door of her room as they left it. Sandry frowned at her, puzzled. Dahlia tapped the web between her right thumb and forefinger. He wears a double X, twice a thief. He'd best stay clear of my things. A dark head appeared in the opening where the stair pierced the floor. Briar had not gone all the way down. You think I'm a sluggard, kid? Everyone knows traders curse their boodle, so them and that Nick, it meet a terrible end. I'm smarter than that. Nick? Sandry asked, stepping onto the ladder. What's that? Briar jumped down out of her way. Steal. You nick it, you steal it. Wonderful, Triss drawled. She was already downstairs and cutting slices from a loaf of coarse bread. Lark set food on the wooden table as Nico lifted a pitcher of milk from the cold box set in the floor. We'll learn thief slang. At least you'll have learned something instead of being just another bleeder all your life, retorted the boy. Lark smiled at him. Briar, would you tell Rosethorn it's midday? Keep after her so she won't forget to come in. He backed up a step. Just eating supper and breakfast with Rosethorn had given him a wary respect for her. What if she bites me? Lark glanced at him with gentle impatience, as if he should have known her reply already. Bite back. Reluctantly, he went out into Rosethorn's domain. The path between rows of unnamed green things was neatly swept. He minced down it, careful not to touch a single leaf. Somehow this garden was different from those he'd seen on the way, different even from the other gardens inside these walls. The plants looked more real, more there. Each stood in its own mound of dirt, opening leaves to the sun like a piece of living magic. He longed to touch them. Fear made him pause. Rosethorn had said that if he or Daja so much as breathed on a plant, they would spend months suspended by their heels in the well. He believed her. Rosethorn was very convincing. She was also nowhere to be seen. He stopped, listening. Dedicates in Air Temple Yellow walked by on the spiral road, talking quietly. Somewhere a dog barked, a goat blatted. Under it all lay the buzz of countless bees. The great looms in the buildings across the road were silent for once, and the weavers having gone to their own midday meal. He would hear if anyone came around. To his left, someone had run cords overhead. From them, strings reached to stakes embedded in the ground. Twining plants wrapped thin tendrils around each string. Slap-brained, he thought, peering at them. What are those vines going to do? Run off? He looked around again. There was still no sign of Rosethorn. Carefully, gingerly, he stepped into the furrow that lay between two rows of tied plants, bare feet sinking into freshly turned, somewhat damp earth. Wriggling his toes in the dirt, he wanted to sprout roots like threads, roots to drink from the land and return its greeting. A bee, thick-bodied and vividly striped in black and yellow, buzzed around his head, wondering what had kept him inside for so long. He didn't know how to talk to bees, let alone explain a thing as complicated as Dedicate Rosethorn. Instead, he knelt to get a closer look at the captive plants. Touching the delicate leaves with careful hands, he felt their pleasure at being in the sun. Watered and digging into rich soil, growing proudly with no insects to munch on their tender parts. The cords helped them to show more of themselves to the light. All the plants nearly sang with happiness, doing the work they were made to do. They welcomed him, reaching out from their cords to wind instead around his fingers and legs and arms. What the? Flinching, Briar looked around and up. Rosethorn stood on the path, her green habit streaked with dirt and stains, a basket full of dead plants on one arm. Her dark brown eyes blazed. Every nerve screeched for him to flee the expected beating, but he locked himself in place. Running would mean tearing the plants that had wrapped themselves around him, maybe stumbling and crushing them. She might see that and wait to get him away for them before she hit him. That he was in for a beating he took for granted. Every other adult that he'd met, except Nico, hit every kid he knew. The cause might be different. Drink, rage, drugs. The kid was in the way, but the result was always the same. He waited for the cuff or the order to get out of there, now. Neither came. After a moment or two, he risked a look at her. She frowned still, now more puzzled than angry. Her eyes were on him, not her plants. One foot gently tapped on the flat earth of the path as if she were thinking. She worked barefoot. Rosethorn's eyes followed his. When she saw her own bare toes, she smiled crookedly. Do I send a messenger for both of you now? Lark called from the back door. Rosethorn extended a dirty hand to him. Come on out of there. Not if you're going to hit me, he retorted. I'm no dafty. She raised her free hand. Mila, strike me if I lie. His faith in gods was not strong, but Mila was her goddess after all, the one she'd given up a normal life for. Just as he was about to stand, he saw the trick. You'll hang me in the well. Rosethorn sighed. That foot tapped again, impatient now. No, I won't. I water this garden with what's in there. I'm not about to poison it. This made sense. Carefully, Briar tried to rise. The plants tightened their hold on their new friend. Stop that, you, Rosethorn muttered, waving her hand at the vines. You know better. Behave. Tendrils released his arms and ankles, returning to the strings that guided them to the sun. When Briar was free, he stepped onto the path, cringing when the dedicate reached out and gripped his chin in a firm and dirty hold. This close, he saw that she was a hand's length taller than his own 5 feet of height. About 30, she had broad shoulders, long legs, and a square, firm jaw. Her auburn hair was trimmed close to her head on the sides and parted neatly on the left. She'd said little the day before to him or to Daja except to threaten them with regard to her garden. Now she searched his eyes for something. He wasn't sure what. At last she let him go and stalked toward the house. Reaching the well, she drew a bucket full of water. "Come on, boy," she called, seeing that he hadn't moved. "Let's wash up." The large wooden table had been pulled out from the wall. Benches, their legs hinged so they could be folded and stored under the table, were set on its long sides, while stools were placed at both ends. Nico shared a bench with Daja and Sandry. It was clear that Lark and Rosethorn were expected to use the stools. In her eagerness to put the table between her and the traitor, Tris found that she now shared a bench with Briar. He returned her glare with one of his own. They scooted as far apart as they could. Lark and Rosethorn crossed their wrist, laying their palms flat on their shoulders, and asked the gods to bless their meal. When they were done, the adults began to pass dishes of food around the table. "I can't wait till the vegetables start coming in," said Rosethorn with a sigh, "especially the tomatoes." "What are those?" Sandry asked. "Vegetables," Rosethorn said briskly, helping herself to bread and handing the plate to Briar, brought from the far side of the endless sea. The boy grabbed 3 slices and shoved the plate toward Tris. "Rosethorn's the only gardener to grow them successfully on this side of the endless, so far," Nico told Tris and Sandy. "Dedicate Crane is trying to grow them in his greenhouse." Rosethorn made greenhouse sound like a midden. "So far, he's failing," she smiled very sweetly. "What's a greenhouse?" asked Briar. He drizzled olive oil and aromatic vinegar over his bread. It was habit to soften bread first, after he had once lost a baby tooth on a crust. Here, where the bread was soft, oil and vinegar added flavor. Rosethorn watched him. "A greenhouse is a building made of all glass." "All glass?" whispered Daja, brown eyes huge. "But that's expensive." "And foolish. Crane thinks he can make fruits and vegetables grow out of season in his..." "And he can," Rosethorn added hurriedly when Lark glared at her. "They just don't taste like much. And he can't grow tomatoes at all." Briar looked down so no one could see the interest in his eyes. So Nico had been telling the truth, and they did grow plants inside the building here. He wondered how soon he might be able to slip away to see this marvel for himself. Lark turned to Nico and asked, "How long are you with us this time?" "At least through the winter." He sipped a cup of milk. "His Grace the Duke has asked me to look at the harbor lighthouses, and the Temple Council has a few chores for me. I'm to freshen the crystals in the seeing place, for one, and there's research I need to do in the libraries." Looking at Tris, he said, "Once I start that, you might like to come along and let me introduce you to the librarians." Tris looked at her plate. On the trip from Caption, he had told her about Winding Circle's libraries, famed throughout the countries around the Pebbled Sea and beyond. The offer was very tempting. If the librarians knew her, they might steer her to the more interesting books. "Nico, you are not a dedicate?" Daja asked. "I thought you must be sealed to this temple since you come here all the time." Rosethorn cackled. "He's no dedicate. That would mean he'd have to stay in one place. He's a mage, as rootless as a dandelion seed drifting on the wind." Briar and Tris stared at the man who had brought them. Sandry and Daja kept their eyes on their food. "How else can I see everything I wish to see?" he replied. To Briar and Tris he added, "Yes, I'm a mage. Beyond that, I'm a treasure hunter. I'm here for now, which is all that really matters." With that, they ate their meal in silence. Despite the fact that he devoured more than anyone else, Briar was the first to finish. He started to get up. Rosethorn put a hand on his arm. "Down, boy," she told him. "You asked to be excused from the table, remember? And wait until Lark gives permission." The hand pressed down. For a small woman, she's strong, he thought with admiration. He sat again. "Can I be excused?" "No." "Listen, you four," Rosethorn said. "While you're here, address problems or questions or needs to Lark. She likes children. The Green Man alone knows why. I don't like children in my garden, not without my say-so anyway," she added with a glance at Briar. "Play somewhere else. Tell Lark where you go, always. Me, you leave alone. And that workshop on the side of the house, the one that's mostly wood, that's mine. Touch anything in there and you will die the worst death I can invent." She looked at each child in turn, then smiled, showing teeth. "I'm glad we had this little talk." Placing her napkin beside her plate, Rosethorn went outside. For a moment there was silence. Then Lark said, "Her bark is worse than her bite." "Better bite's poisonous," muttered Daja. "Just with the bark you die slow," added Triss. They grinned, then remembered that merchants and traders disliked each other and turned away. "Dedicate Lark," a voice called from the front door. "I have boxes from the girls' dormitories for your boarders." "One moment," Lark called. "Briar and Daja, as senior guests, you will clean up, please. Once Sandry and Triss are settled, we'll do a schedule of chores so no one gets stuck with the same tasks all the time." Nico hastily folded his napkin and got to his feet. "I'll see everyone later," he said, and followed Rosethorn out. Lark chuckled. "He thinks he'd get snagged for moving duty. He only does what he wants to, our Nico." Rising, she went to the front door. As Daja started to gather the dishes, Sandry leaned over the table to grab Briar's sleeve and Triss's. Halted from leaving the table, they stared at her. "Nico brought you both here?" asked Sandry. "So?" demanded Triss, peeling the girl's fingers off her sleeve. "What if he did? It doesn't mean he owns me or anything." She stomped across the floor on her way to claim her boxes from the cart. Sandry turned her blue eyes on Briar. "He brought you?" He shook her off. "I don't like nosy bags," he snapped. Grabbing a bucket, he went out to the well. "Well, if Nico's a mage, at least I know how he managed to find me in the middle of the pebbled sea," remarked Daja in trader talk. "I was hidden by magic," Sandry replied in the same language. "So he found you, and he found me, and then he brought us here. Why?" Daja shrugged. "Mamanders have their own reasons for everything they do," she replied. "I'm guessing that mages who aren't traders are the same." "Forget it. You'll just give yourself a nosebleed if you think about it too hard." Sandry touched her small nose, then shook her head and went to get her belongings. Her things set up in her new room, Triss hung partway out of her window, trying to see the dark clouds. The morning storms had passed, but the sky was far from clear. The wind shifted, bringing unfamiliar voices to her ears. "Know how chancy divination is." It sounded like Nico. "These images are too diffuse. There aren't enough of them. From their scarcity, I'd hazard that they're about a possible future, that not one that is probable." "We should be able to tell." This voice was not at all familiar. "If we keep trying." Triss wiped her forehead on her sleeve. If crazy people heard voices, why did hers make sense? She'd read about madness. Voices told the insane that they were gods or that the neighbors planned to murder them. Her voices always had real conversations, and wasn't divination a word for telling the future? "You must do your best." Triss winced. How did Moonstring become one of her mad voices? "Tell me of any change, and let's prepare for a quake. Triss?" She gasped and nearly fell out of the window. Small hands gripped her skirt and hauled her back into the room. Her feet on the floor again, she whirled to glare at the invader. "Sandry, don't you knock?" she demanded, straightening her spectacles. I did knock," replied the other girl, "and I called. You just didn't hear me." Trish shook out her dress with trembling hands. "What do you want?" Sandry hesitated, taking the other girl's scowl. In for a copper, in for a gold, she thought. This winter, I went a little crazy with embroidery and needlepoint. I have these hangings more than I'll ever need. I thought you might like one." She retrieved a plump, neat roll of cloth from her bed where she had dropped it and held it out. Triss looked at it, then glared. "Is something wrong with you?" "What on earth are you talking about?" "Just because we all live here together doesn't mean you can forget your rank. Look at you, hobnobbing with a traitor and now me. You can't do that. I'm merchant blood, understand? It's in my last name. Chandler." Trish spoke the word very slowly, as if Sandry were not quite bright. "You're probably an A or a Fa or something." "That doesn't make any difference," Sandry said, her mouth set in a mullish line. "Only a noble would say something so idiotic." "Here, I'm the same as you." Triss's laugh was as harsh as a crow's. "You wear slippers at 4 silver astrals the pair, cotton broadcloth at 6 silver cresses the yard, and silk chiffon? That's a gold astral the yard, and tell me you're the same." She tugged hard at her own ugly dress. "There is definitely something wrong with you. Go away." "I was trying to be nice." Sandry placed the hanging on the desk. "If you don't want it, then give it to someone else. I don't care." Chin high, she walked out. Triss slammed the door and glared at it. She couldn't see a latch that would stop anyone else from barging in. A nice thing with a thief in the house, she thought. Not that I have anything worth stealing. The roll of cloth sat on her desk, a temptation on cream-colored linen. She thinks I'm stupid enough to believe her, thought Tris. She thinks people never pretended to be my friend before. Curious, she spread the hanging out. It showed a six-spoked wheel with a different, brightly colored bird at the end of each spoke. Flat, the hanging was a good size, 2 feet by 1 foot. It was easy to see how the sticks at the center of the roll would fit to make a frame and how the cloth would attach to it. For a long moment, Tris stared at it, thinking about how beautiful it was. Did she say she did this work? The girl wondered. That can't be right. Probably it was servants, only she claims what they did for her own. Nobles do things like that. Gently she traced and embroidered toucans over large gaudy beak. She loved birds. They coasted so beautifully on the wind or mastered the air with darting turns. Looking around, she found a blank space on the wall that needed to be filled. The hanging could go there, where she could see it from the bed. If she wants it back, I can tell her she gave it, and I'm keeping it, Tris thought fiercely. That'll teach her. What had Honored Moonstream called her? Lady Sandra Lean. Daja, carrying her staff, followed Sandry downstairs. No one else was in the main room by that time. I take it you heard, Sandry remarked with a crooked smile. Plumping herself on the bottom riser, she put her chin on her hands. Not all 9-fingered girls have hatchets, she said in Trader Talk. Some of us just tried to have a conversation with a snapping turtle. She's right, you know, Daja told her in the same language. You should keep to your own kind, not try to make friends with traitors and mean girls with red hair. The other girl sighed. Not you, too. No, my mind's made up. I'll make friends with whomever I want, so there. I just need more uvumi. Patience? Why? Why keep trying? Asked Daja, surprised. Another noble would have smacked her for what she said. Any other noble never would have bothered with me, either. Sandry made a face. If I lived like that, I never would have had any friends. See, it was my parents. They traveled all the time, instead of tending to their lands and being in attendance at someone's court. The nobles we visited thought maybe children would get funny ideas from me, so they said theirs were always in the country, or in the city, or sick with something. So you had to make friends with traders and commoners. Daja shook her head, whistling silently. That is strange. It was hard. Commoners and traders don't exactly fall over themselves to be friends with nobles, if you haven't noticed. I just learned patience. Like I said, uvumi. She grinned up at Daja. The black girl shook her head. Lark says I can go for a walk. You want to come? Sandry rose, smoothing her skirt. Another time? I have to finish unpacking. Daja nodded and headed out of the cottage.